Okay, guys, now it's time for the time lapse of how I approached the rendering my chicken. I did use the reference. My light source is based on what's being shown on the reference. So here we go. All right, so the first step, as always, is to create your midtone. As I mentioned earlier, I actually figured out where the light source was based on the reference. So I just went ahead and wrote that down here. Then I applied that gray midtone across the entire image. Again, sorry for the glare. The window's right in front of me. Right. So after I'm done with my midtone, I started with the shadows. Right. Remember, same as last week's lesson 3. The shadows are going to be darker on the opposite side of the light source, right? Because the further away from the light you are, the darker it's going to be. That's why I start on the opposite side, directly underneath the torso and where the legs are. Right. So go ahead and fill that in and watch closely at how I am like putting in the feathers. Okay, I'm still accounting for the fact that the feathers are here, and I'm creating. It's very subtle, but I'm creating these very soft shadows underneath the feathers. Right, they're not hard shadows where you just see this sudden change. You see this gradual change from dark to light in my shading. Right, this is an example of a more like a harder shadow. Right, in comparison to this, because these feathers are straighter, and wouldn't be as soft as these feathers. That's what was going on in my mind anyway, right? I'm constantly thinking about the texture, right? I'm shading differently depending on what the texture is. So if we look at these feathers here, right? The light source was around this area. Okay, so if the light source is around here, then these feathers underneath are going to be darker, right? That's how you can create that differentiation between these feathers and these feathers. If they were all just the same value, then it'd be hard to see what's actually in front. It's hard to actually see the individual feathers as well, right? So moving on from there, that's pretty much good to go, right? I created some space, that depth, using light values in the front and dark values in the back, right? I moved on to the neck right here. Look at the texture here, right? Much softer. This light transition on this neck area is much softer than this transition like right here. Okay, these transitions here in the body, because they're not as soft as the neck, I used like somewhere in the middle, like a soft. It's a soft shade, or sorry, soft shadow, just uh, not as soft everywhere. Okay, so let's back that up. All right, so if I go backwards to about here, okay, um, before I start adding in. So here at the feet, right at the feet, it's really close to the bottom. I'm adding in these hard shadows. Oh, back up there. I added in some hard shadows, right? I put in hard shadows here because there's not like the texture of the feet is a lot rougher than the texture of the feathers, right? So that's why that shadow is much more like stark, and you can see where the shadow ends, right? Compared to like this area here, where it's very soft and very smooth of a transition using a gradient. This one does not have a gradient. Okay. Then I take my eraser and I start to add in the highlights. So remember that the light source is here when my thumb is. So this area here should be the lightest, taking away that midtone, right? And notice that on the way I'm applying the highlight is I'm just erasing one side of those like feathers, right? I'm making the feathers look round by having one side be light and then this side be dark, right? So this hand is going to be the dark and this side is going to be the light, right? You see how in my camera, sorry, in my camera, you see the window hitting this part more than this part, which is why this hand is a little bit darker. I want my feathers to look round as well, so I try to copy that by having a darker value underneath. Okay, so just also taking my pencil and fixing any of the mistakes any of the midtone that I want to bring back a little bit. All right, and then adding some shadow where it needs to be. Oops, sorry. And then you're pretty much good to go. Okay, I want us to pay attention right here. Very hard shadow to create one type of texture, right? This gizzard that the chicken has is a very, very different, like in terms of softness, It's very different from like any other spot. So I wanted my shading, my texture there to really point that out. Okay. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. Look at this. I really just want you guys to take it home for this lesson. So I used soft shadows for a majority of the chicken, right here, and hard shadows for areas that that do not have feathers to create that difference in contrast. That way you can tell, okay, if I feel this area here, it's gonna seem softer than if I felt this different area. Okay.